What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there. Welcome to Thanksgiving week, which means we got to cram a butt ton of videos into a very short amount of time to make sure you have all the information you need prior to kickoff on Thanksgiving morning. So we got all of your start sits and all of your rankings dropping by the end of the day Wednesday, which means we're not sleeping a whole lot right now, but we're not wasting any more time either. We're getting right in to our starts and sits for the quarterback position here in week 12, and we're kicking off the first game on Thanksgiving, the Buffalo Bills and Detroit Lions. And right off the bat, crazy times are upon us when Josh Allen himself, not even the quarterback 1 overall in fantasy football. First time in like forever. He's quarterback 2 though. It's not like he's super far off, but what I'm finding really hard to accept as of right now is he only has 2 passing touchdowns over his last 3 games combined. But week 11 was only the second time all year long that he didn't even throw for 30 pass attempts in a game either. It's not like he's playing bad, he's just playing average, and that's not what we expect from Josh Allen. Now they got a matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. They allow 24 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is most in the NFL, but Detroit is playing a lot better football over the last 3 weeks of the season and are no longer some cream puff that everybody just steamrolls every single week. When it comes to injuries, offensive lineman David Quessenberry and Mitch Morse both questionable to play, and it's apparent here that Josh Allen is just not 100% healthy. I think that anyone that watches the Bills play, Josh Allen in particular, can just tell it's not the same guy that we had to start the season, which is to be understood, right? He's dealing with an issue in his throwing elbow. It's making him a lot more human these days and making that ceiling a lot lower than maybe what we're used to. Now, there's no way you can afford to sit Josh Allen. The ceiling's still high enough that he's going to be a solid start for you regardless, especially with that rushing upside. That's definitely something we need once again this week in hopes for the bounce back. We're going to start Josh Allen. For his opponent, Jared Goff. Like I said, I love seeing the Lions win some ball games, right? 3 straight wins, but it's not because of Jared Goff. It's more so the running game that's leading them to victory right now. Goff only scored over 16 fantasy points 1 time since week 4 and only has 4 total touchdowns in the last 6 games played. Now, all of a sudden, too, the volume is starting to drop down. He's had exactly, and I mean exactly 26 pass attempts now in 3 straight ball games, and that exact same number in 4 of his last 5. I think we're starting to notice a trend here. Less passing volume, more rushing volume, more Jamal Williams touchdowns. But now they're going up against the Buffalo Bills. They allow 14.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 8th fewest in the league. This offensive line, it's hurting for the Detroit Lions. Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, Evan Brown, they're all questionable to play. DJ Chark questionable as well. I mean, heck, you got Josh Reynolds hurting right now. Jamison Williams is on his way back, but I don't expect him here this week either. I love that this team is winning and scoring points, but that's a bigger thanks to Jamal Williams and his league-leading rushing touchdowns than it is really to Jared Goff. Jamison Williams could definitely raise that ceiling once he's active and ready to go, but with that not being the case just yet, got to continue to sit Jared Goff. Next game up on Turkey Day, New York Giants, Dallas Cowboys. And honestly, I feel like I just checked something off my bucket list at this point. I finally got a Daniel Jones call right in fantasy football. That doesn't happen very often. This guy, every time I tell you to start him, he ends up sucking. Every time I tell you to sit him, dude goes off. Finally, the stars aligned last week, had a great game overall. Fantasy-wise, he finds himself right now at quarterback 10 overall and has multiple touchdowns in 4 of his last 5 games played, but his weapons, they are a dwindling there in New York. He did just throw for over 40 pass attempts, though. That's the first time he's done that in a game this year, so that's not really normal. He's averaging only 27 attempts per game. Now they're going against Dallas. Dallas only allows 13.4 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's 5th fewest in the NFL. And we know Jones struggled against them back in week 3 when they faced off the first time this season. It was a game in which they lost their first loss of the year. Threw for 196 yards, no touchdowns, an interception, and 79 rushing yards. But now they also just lost Wan'Dale Robinson for the year with a torn ACL. And they have 4 members of their offensive line that are currently on their injury report. It is not ideal. I would love to ride the hot hand here this week, but the matchup really tells me otherwise. otherwise when you pair it with the amount of injuries that they're dealing with in New York. Rumors are swirling that Odell Beckham could visit the Giants after Thanksgiving. That would be interesting. I can't see him doing that, but it's definitely a team in need of some offensive weapons on the outside. It's a huge risk playing a game in Dallas against a good defense on Thanksgiving, especially with no quarterbacks on bye weeks because everyone is playing this week, so I have to sit Daniel Jones. His opponent, Dak Prescott. I will not sit Dak Prescott. He will be in the start column because we're starting to get back to vintage Dak now. 3 straight games with multiple touchdowns, at least 250 yards passing in those 3 games as well. Has 75% completion percentage in 3 of his last 4 and only been sacked 3 times in his 3 games back. All of a sudden, Dak's starting to look a lot better when it comes to volume, averaging right around 32 attempts per game, a little bit lower than what we're used to seeing in Dallas, but he's being more efficient. He's getting more done with less pass attempts, which is just fine. Now they're going up against the Giants, who allow 14.9 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. That's 10th fewest in the NFL, and he didn't face them in their first matchup because he was already out due to injuries. Now, when it comes to injuries for the Dallas Cowboys, you got Zeke, who continues to be limited, but most of the other injuries are on the defensive side of the football. Now, Dallas always plays on Thanksgiving, and since 2018, Dak is averaging 340 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions on Thanksgiving Day. They're at home, playing well. Can't sit Dak Prescott. And then lastly, the last game that day, you got the New England Patriots and the Minnesota Vikings. We'll start it off with Mac Jones. And right now, the Patriots are winners of 3 straight games, but much like Jared Goff and the Lions, has nothing to do with the quarterback play. It's really not because of Mac Jones. He only has 2 touchdowns now total since September 25th and no games with multiple touchdowns. They're only throwing the ball 29.8 times per game. We know it's a heavy Mondre and Harris run offense. Now they're going up against Minnesota. They allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 19.6 per game, but there's multiple injuries on the offensive line here. Devontae Parker, he's still on the injury report. Just not enough offense that scores enough points in the passing game to really make me want to start Mac Jones, so he's going to remain a sit. What about Kirk Cousins? The hell was that last week, Kirk? I mean, Dallas just put him in the fetal position last week. He went 12 for 23, only 105 yards passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions, which are all season lows, by the way. His first game of the season without at least 1 touchdown. The offensive line gave up 11 sacks over the last 2 games combined. They'd only given up 16 total in their first 8 games of the season. It was a bad overall game last week for the Minnesota Vikings. Right now they're throwing the ball on average, though, just under 40 times a game, 5th most in the league. Week 11 was just a little bit more of a blip on the radar. Now, a lot of people say, hey, if Kirk Cousins plays in prime time, you don't want to start Kirk Cousins. I understand that, but this team is just too good, too talented, has too many weapons in a matchup that they could probably go out there and put up some decent points. The New England Patriots allow right around 15.9 fantasy points per game, 20th in the league. Not a whole lot of injuries of concern for Minnesota other than offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw, who is once again limited and questionable to play. That is a big loss potentially for that offensive line. But I know right now so many people are out there just ragging on the Vikings right now, and honestly, this is still a pretty good overall team that I do expect them to bounce back. May not be the easiest matchup on paper, but I'm hoping for Justin Jefferson to come out and just explode on Thanksgiving and put on a show in primetime football. Kirk Cousins is going to be a start when it comes to rankings. Maybe verge top 12. May have to drop him down a couple spots. We'll have to wait and see. Make sure you check those out on Wednesday. Next matchup we got here. Let's move to Sunday football now. The Denver Broncos and Carolina Panthers. We'll start off with Russell Wilson, who's still sitting at quarterback 22 overall and just can't really get this offense moving. He now hasn't had multiple touchdowns in a game or at least 25 rushing yards in a game since week 4 and only has 4 total touchdowns now over the last 5 weeks combined. They're still throwing the ball 35 times a game, which is 15th. But what's crazy here, he's number 1 in the league among all quarterbacks in deep ball attempts with 52. He's throwing the ball deep, but he's also number 8 when it comes to dropped passes by pass catchers with 17, so they're not doing him any favors either. Now they're going up against Carolina. They allow 17 fantasy points per game, so it's not a bad matchup. We know the offensive line is missing multiple pieces here. KJ Hamler is injured. Jerry Jeudy is injured. Chase Edmonds is injured and probably going to be out for a while. They just waived Melvin Gordon, so now they're down to just Latavius Murray in their backfield for the most part. As much as I would like to think that Russ has the opportunity at a pretty decent game here, I thought the same thing against the Raiders last week, and their defense is way worse than the Carolina defense, so there's just no way of knowing for sure what's going to happen with Russell Wilson and those inconsistencies. It's just not enough for me to put him into my lineup. He's a sit still. His opponent, I don't care if it's Baker Mayfield. I don't care if it's Sam Darnold. I don't care if they have PJ Walker out there on crutches. I'm not starting the quarterback right now for the Carolina Panthers. There's just too many unknowns here. Now they're going up against Denver, who allows the second fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. We're not wasting a whole lot of time on the Panthers. I don't care who starts. They're not going to be in my fantasy lineup this weekend. How about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Cleveland Browns? We'll start off with Tom Brady. He's coming off the bye week and he's ready for a late season run, right? That's kind of what we're used to seeing from Tom Brady. Now, in the game prior to the bye week, he had probably his best game since week 4, but it was only his second game with multiple touchdowns on the year. A positive, though, he's only thrown 2 interceptions on the season, so he's protecting the football, just needs more scoring opportunities, needs more touchdowns. Now, we know that this offense is going to continue to throw the ball a lot. They're not overly reliant on running the ball. Sure, Leonard Fournette, if healthy, Rachaad White, both capable of catching passes out of the backfield. Now they're going up against Cleveland, who allows right around 16 fantasy points per game. But really, how healthy is this team coming off the bye week? We mentioned Leonard Fournette. Is he going to be good to go? Do we see more Rachaad White? What about Russell Gage? Is he going to be back in the lineup? Because you could have Gage, Julio, Evans, and Godwin all together at the same time. So being that it's a road game in Cleveland, they're a team that wants to keep the clock running, so they're going to run the ball a lot, but this is Brady coming off of a bye week. That's not a bad thing. I'll go ahead and start the GOAT. How about Jacoby Brissett? This dude just went like Super Saiyan in week 11. 324 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions against the Buffalo Bills in a game played in Detroit. That was by far, and it's really not even that close, his best game of the year. It's his first 300-yard passing game and only his second game all season with multiple touchdowns. He also just threw for over 40 pass attempts, which is only something he's done twice all year this season. He's only averaging right around 32 attempts per game. Now they're going up against Tampa Bay, who allows almost 15 fantasy points per contest to opposing quarterbacks, 9th fewest in the league, and had an extra week to prep for this matchup with their bye week. Their offensive line still missing multiple guys. But I love what Jacoby Brissett has done this year. A lot of people wrote this entire offense off when they knew that they weren't going to have Deshaun Watson. I heard people say, no, I'm off on Amari Cooper. No, I'm off on David Njoku. No, I'm not going to go with Nick Chubb. They're just going to stack boxes against him. And this guy just continues to make fantasy viable options for us in this offense, whether it's Chubb, Cooper, Njoku, Donovan Peoples-Jones. There's options in this offense, and it's thanks to Jacoby Brissett, just not consistent enough with a high enough ceiling to start every week in fantasy football, so he'll remain a sit. How about the Baltimore Ravens and Jacksonville Jaguars? Lamar Jackson is now down to quarterback 6 overall on the season and has now had single-digit touchdowns in 6 of his last 7 games, and in one of those games, he had 0 touchdowns. This dude needs some help. He's approaching 20 dropped passes by his wide receivers as well, so he needs more help from his ball catchers on the outside, because it's not a very high-volume passing offense to begin with, averaging just under 30 attempts per game. We can't afford to have drops when we're throwing the ball so little. Now they're going up against Jacksonville. They allow 17.5 fantasy points per game to opponents. That's 11th most in the league, but they're coming off their bye week as well. Offensive lineman Ronnie Stanley left the game with an ankle injury last week. Does he make it back this week? That would be a huge loss to the offensive line, but the X factor continues to dwindle for me here. And as the season progresses, a lot of that electricity that we see around Lamar Jackson is starting to fade. However, he possesses the skill set in an offense built for him to really make a late season run. Is Lamar Jackson a gimme top 3, top 4 quarterback anymore? Probably not every single week. Is he somebody that you should consider sitting? Probably not, because he can win you your matchup all by himself, maybe a little bit lower in the rankings, but still a start. His opponent, Trevor Lawrence, they're coming off their bye week like I mentioned. He's sitting at quarterback 13 overall in fantasy football, played well in the game prior to their bye week as well. It was his first game with multiple touchdowns since week 6, but in that game prior to the bye, they did face the Kansas City Chiefs, so that's somewhat to be expected. They're throwing the ball on average 35 times a game, kind of middle of the pack, sitting at 13th in the league. Baltimore allows just over 17 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, 10th most in the NFL. They are playing a little bit better here as of late. No other major injuries of concern in Jacksonville, relatively pretty healthy. I just don't understand here with Trevor Lawrence. He plays better on the road than he plays at home for some reason. He's averaging 15 fantasy points per game in home games and 22 fantasy points per game on the road. Now, with Baltimore's defense playing a little bit better, he's going to remain a start, but a lower end start for me here this week. Houston and Miami up next. Davis Mills, I still like what this guy does, but he's failed to break 200 yards passing now in 3 of the last 4 games he's played. Going up against Miami, even though it's a great matchup for them, they allow over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. There's just not enough here to want to start Davis Mills. I like what he has to offer, but just not in this offense overall in Houston. We're not considering Davis Mills, but we will consider Tua Tagovailoa, who is also back off of his bye week and one of only 8 quarterbacks in all of fantasy football to average over 20 fantasy points per game. He's had at least 3 passing touchdowns now in 3 straight games and has only been sacked 2 times since week 4. They are protecting Tua. He's not having to throw the ball a lot. Thank you to his yak receivers, right? When you got guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, they can make something happen after the catch. So he's not having to do a whole lot to put up big numbers. It's a difficult matchup on paper, right? They're going up against the Houston Texans. They allow only 13.1 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 4th fewest in the league. But Derek Stingley being injured really helps out Tua Tagovailoa in this passing offense. The secondary of the Houston Texans is banged up, so this difficult matchup may not be as difficult as it really looks on the surface. This offense is just so creative. There's so many weapons, and with the injuries in Houston, I'm definitely still going to start Tua. How about the Chicago Bears and New York Jets? What about Justin Fields? QB 4 overall on the year, has multiple touchdowns now in 5 straight games, but I'm not going to lie, I am worried about him here this week. And not so much his play, not so much the matchup. It's the shoulder injury that he suffered in last week's ball game. It's his non-throwing shoulder. I totally get that. But we saw in that ball game late, he stopped running the football to limit the amount of hits that he was going to take on that shoulder. That's a problem because we really want the rushing upside of Justin Fields. It's really what's made him into this entirely different level over the last 5 weeks of the season. And if we don't have that, all of a sudden the ceiling comes crashing down. We need that rushing upside. And if he limits that this week to limit those hits, we could be worried because it's a very difficult matchup when you talk about the New York Jets. They're only allowing 15.3 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 22nd in the league. This is a solid defense right here for the Jets. Now, I talked to the doc. I said, hey, what are we thinking about Justin Fields? And he's like, man, as of right now, we just don't know. It's a 50-50 chance of him even playing this week, which is terrifying for Justin Fields owners, but it's something we will update a little bit later on in the week. We're going to have to watch it closely, right? I mean, hopefully he plays. If he does play, is he an overall smash start, a top 5 start? Maybe not. We need 100% Justin Fields, but as of right now, he still remains in the start column. His opponent does not. Zach Wilson here and all the talk surrounding the Jets and his post-game comments about, is he letting the defense down? And then head coach Robert Saleh coming out and not committing to Zach Wilson. I mean, this is not a situation where we really want to tempt it for fantasy football regardless if things were good. We're definitely not going to do it when things are bad. So even though a lot of people want to ignore the reasons as to why Zach Wilson is struggling, they just want to say the dude sucks or he's not any good or he's just playing bad. A lot of people just forget to tell you that they've lost almost their entire starting offensive line from the beginning of the season. He's lost Breece Hall. The whole issues with Elijah Moore in that offense. Corey Davis has been hurt. I mean, we could go on for a long time. There's been a lot of issues around the Jets, but right now, Zach Wilson taking the brunt of it and not going to be a fantasy start. Let's move on to Cincinnati and Tennessee now. We got Joe Burrow, quarterback 5 on the year, coming off his best game of the year against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 355 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, finished as quarterback 1 overall last week. Plus, Ja'Marr Chase is getting closer and closer to returning. Are we a week or 2 away from the return of Ja'Marr Chase? That would definitely be a huge boost going into playoff time. Now, what about the injury to Joe Mixon as well? Does that mean that we see a little bit more in the passing game, even more so this week than we've seen in weeks past? That is entirely possible and something else we're paying attention to. We know they're going to throw the ball a lot, though. 6th most in the league, averaging 38 attempts per ball game. Now they're going up against Tennessee. They allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks at 20.1. They're a lot easier to throw on than they are to run on. Like I said, we'll continue to monitor the injuries of Joe Mixon and Ja'Marr Chase. I'm not counting on Ja'Marr Chase this week. I don't want to make sure I hype it up a little bit too much and say there's really an opportunity for that, because I don't believe there is. But on a team that has so many weapons in a good matchup, we know we're starting Joe Burrow. Ryan Tannehill, I wanted to start Ryan Tannehill. I really, really wanted to start him here, because lately he's just been playing so well. We're talking about vintage Tanny is starting to show up here. He's now had back-to-back games with at least 250 yards passing and multiple touchdowns, and now he's starting to go deep down the field to Treylon Burks, kind of like we saw in years past to A.J. Brown. Still only averaging 24 pass attempts per game, but over his last 2 games has bumped that average up to 31.5 pass attempts per game. That definitely helps his overall ceiling. Now he's going up against Cincinnati, who on paper is a very difficult matchup, allowing only 13.5 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, but this is another team that's dealing with a lot of injuries in the secondary, so this defensive matchup may not be as difficult as it looks on paper. No other major injuries of concern for Tennessee, and even if I were to put a 5 right here in X Factor, which I hardly ever do, because then I'm pretty much just saying I'm counting on this guy to absolutely smash it this week, I still don't hate Ryan Tannehill. I don't. Maybe if you're in a pinch, I don't see why you would be, with there being no bye weeks this week, very minimal injuries. Maybe you're a Kyler Murray owner, and we don't know for sure. Maybe a Matthew Stafford owner, or a Justin Fields owner, and maybe you're looking for some insurance. I don't mind Ryan Tannehill, but as of right now, got him as a sit. How about the Atlanta Falcons and Washington Commandos? We'll start off with Marcus Mariota, a guy in which I've started for the last couple weeks. He's actually back inside the top 10 overall at the position. He's had back-to-back games of 19-plus fantasy points, and that's definitely helping his case right now. We're just so dependent on the rushing upside that we get every week from him. It's already a team that just doesn't throw very much, right? They're only averaging 23 pass attempts per game. That's 31st in the league, and there's only 32 teams, and now he's losing even more weapons with Kyle Pitts being placed on IR. I can hear you out there. I understand Kyle Pitts hasn't done a whole lot, but that is one more thing that the defense does not have to pay attention to when they're playing the Falcons. Now they're going up against the Washington Commandos. They're allowing 17.4 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, which is 12th most, but another team that is playing really well here as of late. These season-long averages are kind of skewing some of the numbers for some of these teams that have gotten a little bit hot here over the last month. So with the loss of Kyle Pitts, what does this mean? Does this mean we see more Cordero Patterson? That's what I'm really hoping for. We've seen him some in the return game. We've seen him some in the backfield. We need more in the passing game, and this could be his opportunity. I really want to trust Marcus Mariota and throw him into the start column going forward. But I'm kind of worried that we see a whole lot of Patterson, a whole lot of Tyler Algier, and a little bit of Caleb Huntley this week, and that kind of brings down the ceiling and the floor for Marcus Mariota, so that's why I got him as a sit. His opponent, Taylor, give me a Heineke. This kid is just lighting a fire on this team, but he's not doing it all himself, right? It's not just him out there willing this team to victory, but you can tell they're playing with a lot more confidence, a little bit more cocky, and it's because of the play and the attitude of Taylor Heineke. He's just not doing enough to be considered a weekly must-start guy. He has no touchdowns in the last 2 games played. Both of those games were on the road, and this guy plays way, way better at home. He only has 2 games all year with multiple passing touchdowns. Both of those games, played at home this year. A coincidence? I think not. And they weren't just, layup matchups either. He did it against Green Bay and Minnesota. Now, he needs the touchdowns, though, because the volume is not very high in this offense. We're still seeing a lot of Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, but now they're going up against Atlanta. And Atlanta allows just under 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 7th most in the league. No other major injuries of concern here, and this kid is a walking X factor as of right now. I think we're going to see a little Heine magic this week, if I do say so myself. He's not going to be super high in the rankings, but another one of those guys, kind of like Ryan Tannehill. If you're in a pinch, you got an injured quarterback, you don't know who else to use, could be one of those options for you here this week. What about the Los Angeles Chargers and my Arizona Cardinals? I don't know if I should keep admitting that anymore. They're breaking my heart once again. Anyway, we'll start off with Justin Herbert here. Now, he's sitting inside the top 12 barely. I'm talking by like a no-guard manscaped hair. Is he still inside the top 12? He finally got Keenan Allen back. He finally got Mike Williams back. And then, a few plays into the game, he loses Mike Williams again, but still throws for 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception last week against the Kansas City Chiefs. But we know this is still an offense that's going to throw a lot, and they do still have Keenan Allen, which is great. Keenan Allen back paired with Josh Palmer. Maybe they also get back Gerald Everett. We know about Austin Eckler as well. And now they're going against Arizona, who allows over 17 fantasy points per game, top 10 in the NFL, most points allowed to quarterbacks. Look what we just saw Jimmy G. Jimmy G just threw for 4 touchdowns against this defense, and at times this defense looks like it didn't want to even be out there on the field. With these guys potentially coming back in Everett and Keenan Allen being closer to 100% health, I'm going to start Justin Herbert once again. When it comes to Arizona, though, this is just wishful thinking, y'all. I put Kyler Murray on the slide. I got Colt McCoy as well. I'm not so sure that Kyler even plays. I would not be surprised if they rest him until after their bye week. I mean, let's be honest here. They're not really playing for the playoffs as of right now. But if it's Colt McCoy, I'm really not even considering it, right? I will consider it if Kyler Murray is good to go. Right now, the Chargers, they're allowing just under 17 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. It's an opportunity maybe for Kyler Murray to get Marquise Hollywood Brown back with DeAndre Hopkins. I wouldn't mind it if Murray is 100%. Obviously, he's one of the best fantasy quarterbacks out there, but I'm just not so sure he's going to play just yet. This is something we need to pay attention to throughout the week. This is one of those situations where maybe if you have a Kyler Murray, you're looking at a Ryan Tannehill or a Taylor Heineke as just a backup option because, like I said, I'm not so sure he's going to play. If he plays, if he's healthy, you're going to start him. How about the Las Vegas Raiders, Seattle Seahawks? We'll start off with Derek Carr, and yet another solid outing for Derek Carr. That's now 3 straight games with at least 245 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, and him and Davante Adams are just hot right now. He's also got 3 straight games with no interceptions, and as much as they're throwing the ball, that is definitely a good sign. He's taking care of the ball and not giving it back to the other team so consistently, averaging 37 pass attempts per game over the last 3 games played. Going up against Seattle, they allowed just under 18 fantasy points per contest to opposing quarterbacks. That's 11th most in the league. This offensive line is still struggling. We know we're still without Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. They're on offense, but this Raiders team, with the way that Carr and Adams are playing, is almost enough to make him a solid floor start each and every week. Davante Adams cannot be stopped right now. Derek Carr is just overly reliant on him right now, but it's working. So Derek Carr as a low-end start here once again. For Geno Smith, glad to have him back off of his bye week. He's quarterback 7 overall on the season, has 8 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions over his last 4 games played, and has had multiple passing touchdowns in 8 of the 10 games he's played this season. That's the consistency that we're looking for, and they're not having to throw the ball a lot either, only 32 times a game, which is 22nd in the NFL. But this matchup is great going up against Las Vegas. They allow 21.4 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. No major injuries of concern for Seattle. A good matchup coming off the bye week with all your weapons healthy. That's when we start Geno Smith. How about the Los Angeles Rams and Kansas City Chiefs? Normally, I would be super pumped and looking forward to this matchup, but the Rams, they're just not doing it for me this year. I got Matthew Stafford here, but I'm not even for sure that this guy is going to play this week. He's back in the concussion protocol once again. Backup quarterback John Wolford, he's hurt as well. Are we really going to start the 3rd string quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams? No, we're really not considering it here in fantasy football. We know they're throwing the ball about 35 times a game. Kansas City is a great matchup. They allow over 20 fantasy points per contest to opposing quarterbacks, but But who is it going to be? Are we going to trust Matthew Stafford, who's currently still in concussion protocol? We may not even know till the weekend whether or not he's going to play. Yeah, no, it's not looking good for the Rams. Not looking like a good matchup. This could definitely be one that gets out of hand early, and we see a lot of backups come into the game anyway. So at this point, if Stafford's not 100% healthy, I'm not starting anybody else for the Rams. For Patrick Mahomes, he is the new quarterback 1 overall in fantasy football. Man, he's just playing so good. And it doesn't even matter if he has all his wide receivers available or not. I mean, he still just found a way to throw for 3 touchdowns. It's called Travis Kelce, okay? And nobody can stop Travis Kelce. All the other wide receivers in this offense are just a bonus at this point. You know they're going to be a throw first team, even though Isaiah Pacheco is running the ball pretty hard right now. Doesn't look half bad. The Rams allow right around 15.5 fantasy points per contest, but CEH is injured. Do we get back Juju this week? Mecole Hardman is out. Do we miss Kadarius Toney once again? A lot of question marks in this offense, but the 2 mainstays are Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and they just cannot be stopped by anyone. The Rams are down right now, and I could definitely see Kansas City utilizing this opportunity to really hit them with a knockout punch, and I will not be surprised if Patrick Mahomes goes out there and puts up another big number once again. Fun fact, the last time Patrick Mahomes faced the Los Angeles Rams was back in 2018. I don't know if you remember watching it or not, but in that game, he threw for 478 yards and 6 touchdowns. So, am I calling for that this weekend? That may be a little steep, but I'm definitely starting Patrick Mahomes. What about the New Orleans Saints, San Francisco 49ers? I mean, Andy Dalton took those rumors of Jameis Winston getting this job back personally, right? He just went out there and said, F y'all, I'm throwing for 260, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and finished inside the top 12 of the position just last week, and he's benefiting from having guys back like Jarvis Landry. Now, they're averaging just over 33 pass attempts per game, but this is not an easy matchup. San Francisco is only allowing 14 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 6th fewest in the league. This is a team dealing with multiple injuries on the offensive line and a great pass rush of the San Francisco 49ers. Could he potentially have a great game again? I think that he could. Do I want to tempt that fate against a confident San Francisco 49ers defense right now? I would rather not. That's why he's listed as a sit for Jimmy G, though. I mean, I guess he went out there and apologized for the Week 10 downer, right? With only just 1 touchdown, because in Week 11, 228 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and the offense right now is just humming along. There's just too many weapons out there to stop them all. When you got the likes of George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, the list goes on. There is so much yak, yards after the catch right there for that team. It's an easy day for Jimmy G. He's just got to find a way to throw these little 10-yard passes and watch these guys take it to the house. Going up against the Saints, they allow over 17 fantasy points per game. He's going to continue to be a very safe floor play each and every week with the occasional pop-off like we saw last week. I'm definitely keeping him as a start. What about the Green Bay Packers and Philadelphia Eagles? We'll start off with Aaron Rodgers, and after the super slow start from Aaron Rodgers, he has now creeped back up inside the top 12 overall quarterbacks on the season, and really has Christian Watson to thank for that. 5 touchdowns over the last 2 games, but we're really starting to get more pieces of this offense involved. Having Randall Cobb back does help as well. They're throwing the ball right around 35 times a game. Difficult matchup though, right? Going up against Philadelphia, they only allow 10.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is the fewest in the league. Now, there's no other major injuries of concern here for Green Bay. Still no Romeo Doubs, offensive line not 100%, but this will not be an easy matchup for Aaron Rodgers. But it's still Aaron Rodgers, and they're finding a way to put the ball in the end zone. It's really hard to sit Aaron Rodgers when he gets into a groove. When he starts to get some consistency to his game, he's really hard to stop. But I am going to temper expectations here. I'm not expecting a huge day from Aaron Rodgers against this defense. He may be a little bit lower in my rankings, but with the consistency and the ability for them to find the end zone with multiple pieces now, Aaron Rodgers still barely a start for me. His opponent, Jalen Hurts, of course, we're starting Jalen Hurts. He's the quarterback 3 overall in fantasy football, but his overall yardage totals have really been down over the last 3 weeks, but luckily, he's making up for it in touchdowns, so it's not really that noticeable. He's had at least 2 touchdowns now in 6 straight ball games. Not throwing the ball a ton, but that rushing upside is helping him when it comes to overall volume. Going up against Green Bay, they allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at only 14.2, but they're not 100% healthy in the secondary either. We know there's still no Dallas Goedert for this offense in Philadelphia, but Jalen Hurts just continues to find a way to put this team on his back when they're having trouble on offense and put the ball in the end zone. Even though it's a difficult matchup, we're not sitting Jalen Hurts. And then lastly, Monday Night Football, Pittsburgh Steelers, Indianapolis Colts, 2 quarterbacks that I'm really not interested in starting when it comes to fantasy football. Kenny Pickett is starting to look a little bit better, has no interceptions now over his last 2 games played. However, still only has 3 passing touchdowns in 6.5 games worth of football. Did add in 3 rushing touchdowns as well, 2 of which were like in his first game action. So it's been a long time, but he's starting to throw the ball a little bit more, averaging 38 attempts per contest here over the last few games. The Colts allow right around 16.5 fantasy points per contest. Offensive lineman Mason Cole is questionable, along with Jalen Warren, the running back who went out early in last week's game. They're making improvements in Pittsburgh, right? Not to the point yet where I want to start Kenny Pickett, though, and then Matt Ryan. A lot of the same can be said for Matt Ryan, right? He's not playing bad. He's just not a fantasy asset right now. Only has 2 passing touchdowns over his last 3 games combined, but he really is helping the likes of Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell, even Alec Pierce getting targets once again, way better than Sam Ehlinger was, but now they're going against Pittsburgh. It's a decent matchup. They allow over 20 fantasy points per contest, but they're getting healthier in Pittsburgh, so that number should start coming down a little bit. Indianapolis has offensive tackle Matt Pryor, who is questionable to play, but most of the other injuries on the defensive side of the football. Ceiling is just too low to trust here. Like I said, Matt Ryan is helping other fantasy assets, but not so much an asset himself, so he'll remain a sit. And there you have it, my starts and sits for the quarterback position here, Week 12 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you some information to really help you make a decision on your teams here this week. Just a reminder, we'll have all of our rankings videos out prior to the games on Thanksgiving, so make sure you check those out last minute to see if you have any last minute tweaks to your lineup that you're looking for. But hopefully you enjoy the content. If you do me a favor, hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Even though the season's starting to wind down, we're here all year long and got some great things coming up, not only for giveaways, but we got some good off-season ideas to do more for you, the community, and hang out with you guys a little bit more as well. Looking forward to doing that, but I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hope you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.